I'm here today again with a new podcast. And in this case, I'm interviewing Stephanie Cohen, that is a public speaking coach for international professionals. She's now based in Prague, but she's from the States. So there is so much on the journey of Stephanie as a coach that is so interesting because she actually has a background on theater. And also, she has been working training people in tech on their soft skills and communication skills. So I'm really thrilled to have Stephanie today and ask her a lot of questions to help us as international communicators and professionals. So, hi, Stephanie. Thanks
Hi.
a lot for coming to the podcast. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. And the first thing I really like to learn more, it's about your journey. And because you have a background in theater, and I find that our acting skills, there is power in our acting skills regarding soft skills, regarding communication skills, even more in a second language. So I want to know about your background, how somebody that was in acting school ended up as a
Mhm.
communication coach. So I'm really interested to know how that happened for you, how that unfolded for you.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to talk about all kinds of things today. But to answer your question, it didn't happen in a planned manner. Let's just say that. So, um, my background is that since I was 5 years old, maybe even before that, I very much wanted to perform. So that was just an innate part of my character. I remember seeing videos of me as a kid just up singing and dancing and doing crazy things and stuff. So that aspect of me has kind of always been around. So luckily I was in a family that really encouraged that and let me express it. So from a very young age, like I said, I think 5 years old or something, I started acting in like children's plays and things like that. So mostly it was just for fun, right? It's just like an after school activity that you did as a kid. But as I got older, and obviously I enjoyed it more and more, I kept doing things, being more involved in theater. I eventually decided that that's what I wanted to do with my life. So to be a professional actor. So of course I went to university for theater and performance and acting. Um, and my big goal back then was to either be a star on Broadway or to go to Hollywood and, make films and everything. And for the longest time, that was just a one track goal for me. So I didn't really even consider doing anything else. And I remember I had a conversation with my mom right before I was about to say yes to university. And she was like, okay, promise me that if I let you go and study theater, that you will do something like a minor, a double major, something that will actually help you in life and bring you money. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess that's a fair deal. And so I always had the sense in the back of my mind, even though my family was super supportive, that like, okay, this is something that's more of like maybe an artistic expression, less a guaranteed way of being quote unquote successful and, financially successful, especially because actors are not exactly known for being wealthy people unless they are Meryl Streep or somebody like that. And so that was kind of the entry into my adult life was this, okay, you can go do this thing that you're super passionate about, but it's probably also a good idea to have a backup plan. And of course, going through school, I realized that, wow, there's lots of really talented, amazing, special people. And a lot of those people are my friends, which is really great. But I realized very quickly that that dream that I had, while still maybe possible, was less and less likely as time went on. And I was accepting that, right? Because I could see how amazingly talented everyone was around me. That again, it's not to knock my passion or my skills or anything like that, but I started to realize that my mom's advice kind of made sense, that maybe I should also think about other ways of being an adult. And so around the time I was finishing university, I promise the story does have a point. Right around the time I was finishing university, I got a part-time job working at Apple. So like the Apple store where they sell iPhones and computers and things like that. And that was really my first introduction to the world of tech. So of course I used Apple products before that, but actually being there, learning how to sell things, how to work in a more corporate and retail environment, the communication skills around that, while very similar to the same types of communication skills I learned in the theater world, I was starting to see how some of those things were applicable outside of the theater world. And then, of course, gaining my own insights into kind of like the corporate side of things, because theater and corporate usually don't go very well together. But that's kind of maybe the longer version of that is how I got to where I am now as a public speaking coach for international professionals was because I had this background in theater and I did it for, I don't, at this point, I might age myself, I don't know, 20 plus years I've been doing theater. And then, of course, having this professional experience in the world of tech. And I was at Apple for 5.5 years. And then that's actually when I moved to Prague. And, there's a whole story there as well. But this idea that I could take the skill sets that I learned growing up in the theater world and being in a professional environment in the theater world and use those same skills in a different way in this corporate environment was really a big aha moment for me. And not only just that it was applicable, but that I was actually pretty good at it as well. And not to toot my own horn, but I did have people coming up to me and being like, "Oh, you're so good at like explaining things to customers," or, "Oh, you're so great at diffusing a tense situation. Can you help me with that?" And I was starting to see that pattern more and more as I was progressing in the company, which was kind of a little bit of a wake up call that I was like, oh, this might actually be relevant to people outside of me. And that's kind of where the journey began. And as I said, there's many chapters after that, but I think that's just to give you some insight into the theater world aspect of why that ended up being a really valuable skill outside of just something I was really passionate about doing.
Yeah, I totally get that, and it's so relatable also to my own journey because I used to work as a theater teacher for kids in English,
Oh, yeah.
for quite a long time, and I did a little master degree on education, and my the expertise or the specialization was in theater, so I was giving this kind of theater course to
Yeah.
teenagers, and I loved it. I learned so much about theater and the acting arts, and I love cinema. I study script writing and movie and things like that. And it's exactly what you say. You may think, I want to be in the movies, or I want to
Hmm.
be an actress, or I want to perform in that way. But then you go into business, like in working with business people or like working in companies, and all the skills you learn from acting, from script writing, storytelling are what these people need in business. It's
Exactly.
very pragmatic when you put it like that, and it's the realization. I think maybe they are these kind of skills are not the soft skills, right? I don't like soft
Mhm.
or the skills, but these kind of essential skills are not maybe taught at the education system
Yeah.
for like this kind of jobs or for like being an international business person or like making a speech or communication. It's actually all about that. So it's great that you find that kind of correlation between
Mhm.
everything you learn in acting school and how it could be applicable to like business and things like that.
Yeah.
Who knows if in another parallel life you're actually having an incredible acting career.
Yeah. Who knows, right?
knows?
Like,
Who knows?
listen, if anyone is an agent who's listening, come find me. No.
Yeah,
But I think what you said actually really makes sense though, because I think a lot of times, and I've run into this with my clients as well, that we kind of underestimate our skill set that we have. And like, oh, but that's not an exact match, or oh, that why would something in this like artistic field be applicable to something in a more technical field, right? It just we immediately discount that as something as not valuable when in fact your atypical background might actually be the thing that makes you stand out and excel at whatever it is that you're doing. So if it's a speech or teaching kids theater, like whatever it is. But
totally,
um,
totally.
I think discounting your varied, crazy experiences throughout your life is a big mistake people make, but it's one that's easily corrected, thankfully.
Yes, yes. And like coming a little more into your story because you are from the States,
Hmm.
and you ended up in Prague.
Yeah.
And I'm curious also about your experience as an American living in Europe, the differences in communication styles between Americans and Europeans, and what are interesting things that we should know regarding how to approach communication with Americans, or if we're making business with Americans. Like,
Yeah.
so two things regarding this question, but starting with your story, your immersive experience in Europe, and what will you choose? Will you choose to live in Europe or in the States because you have a unique vision about it?
Oh. Wow, that's a good question. I think my mom also would like to know the answer to that question. So what I can tell you is, right now I'm very happy with where I'm at. So I am based in Prague in the Czech Republic. I've been here now almost 8 years, actually, which is wild to say out loud. So it's been a minute since I arrived here. But for anyone who hasn't been to Prague yet, it is an absolutely beautiful fairy tale like city. And it just has so much history. Okay, I hear the American in me because I know everywhere in Europe has a lot of history, or maybe the rest of the world as well. But the amount of history and culture, there's a lot of similarities, there's a lot of differences, but I'm currently very content with where I am. So sorry, Mom. But I think to answer your question, some of the things that I've realized is that you don't know what is your culture until you leave it. Creating a little bit of distance gives you that perspective to be like, oh, I thought this was totally normal, and
Yeah.
this other thing was totally weird. But then, of course, you move to a different place or you are studying in a different place. It doesn't have to be for 8 years to find this out, but you start to realize, oh, what I interpreted to be normal or a given, right? Just everyone does the same thing is not, right? Because, of course, we all have completely different backgrounds and experiences, cultural histories, things like that. So, when it comes to communication, I find this really fascinating because for me, as an American, but also as an American New Yorker theater person, I'm very loud. And you can probably hear me before you see me in most conversations. And so for me to then move to a place that, for a very long time was under communist control, everyone perceives that loudness, that level of volume and personality very differently. And of course, not everyone, I'm making broad generalizations, but coming to a place where, on the tram, for example, like it's really supposed to be quiet, right? Like no one's really supposed to be talking, laughing. It's just look forward, that's it. And to be fair, that's the same in the United States. You don't really expect to have like loud, boisterous conversation on public transit. But something as little as that, where if I'm chatting with a friend, I think at a normal volume, all of a sudden I have lots of like little old ladies looking at me, basically giving me daggers in their eyes, telling me to shut up. And so,
Yes.
it's small things like that, that unless you leave your comfort zone, you leave the familiarity of your home place, then you start to realize, oh, okay, this is slightly different. And I've noticed, because now I'm also working in a corporate environment as well, that my Americanness sometimes is quite useful, right? Because I can be like, oh, I'm just happy and smiley all the time. Just American, okay. And so people maybe underestimate me in that case, which I always appreciate. I always think that's a good situation. And then on the other hand, they might I don't know, want me to do something for them because their skill set is somewhere else and mine is more about like, oh yeah, I can sweet talk someone into, persuading them into my idea or something like that. So it has its bonuses, it has its minuses, but at the same time, it is who I am as a person. And so I try to, of course, leverage those strengths when I can, but also being very aware of when that doesn't work to someone's advantage. So on the tram, not so much, right? But perhaps, if we are trying to convince a client to buy something, I don't know, then, my smiliness, there we go. My smiles and my positive demeanor and the fact that I can choose language that is a little bit softer versus more direct, that might speak to a client in a different way than saying, this is what we recommend, this is what we think you should do.
Mhm.
What questions do you have? Right? Like the directness can sometimes be off-putting. And, the opposite is true as well. You don't want someone to be like super sweet and tell you nice things you want to hear. You want someone to just tell you what's happening, right? So there's times where it's a bonus and sometimes where it's not. But I've learned now, being out of my home environment, that those tendencies exist. And so now it's a choice of where do I want to leverage them? And I think anyone who works in a international environment will have that sense of, oh, these folks do it a little differently than I would do it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes it doesn't matter, but like trying to figure out where you stand on the communication scale, I guess, is something that I think is a valuable insight, because then when working with someone like you or I, like in a coaching environment, then you have a clearer idea of the things you want to focus on and improve, instead of just saying, well, I don't know, I just know that I'm bad at communication.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's not true. Like, it's just, where are you bad at communication? And I hate saying bad, of course, but I know that that's sometimes what our clients tell us. And so it's really a nice moment to have when you realize that you're just used to different tendencies and different traditions and cultures. And so, it's much easier to adjust at that point. So that's the exciting part about being someone who's not from here and trying to work with people and communicate with folks. So it's been a journey, definitely.
Wow, that's so. I think, there are a lot of things that came to me. The first, that I think you will be very welcome in Spain because I think Spain is kind of loud. Like, I remember when I lived in Denmark, so my experience abroad was mostly there, so in the Scandinavian countries and that, and I loved it. But it's like that, like they are much more like calm or like quiet in
Mm,
general, and we're louder as Spanish people. I remember like when I came back from living there in the airport in Barcelona, and everybody was so loud, and
oh
I
my God.
was used to like silence, that I was like, "Oh, I've never realized how loud we are in Spain until this contrast." So I
Yep.
totally get what you say. And another thing that came to me when you were sharing that is the aspect of introversion and extroversion in communication,
Yes.
because it's quite of a big misconception that people that are introverts, or like they relate more to introversion, they think they cannot be great at communication or great
Hmm.
public speakers, because, oh, this is something only extroverts can do, and
Yeah.
I don't believe that. I think that there are unique strengths in both styles of personality, and it's exactly what you say, how you can strategically use those traits in your advantage in every situation, adapting. So that's the aspect of acting, right?
Yeah.
I want to go in that direction now regarding acting skills. And what do you think are aspects from acting skills that people should tap into more when communication situations, even more specifically in your second language? Because
Yeah.
in communication coaching, it's a very unique set of new skills when you're doing it in a second language. So,
Yeah.
in your experience, what are like some acting techniques, strategies that are really useful for folks that are trying to improve in this area?
The first thing that comes to my mind, and it maybe sounds too simple, but sometimes the best ideas are the simplest ones. I think the biggest translation from the acting world to the communication world or the business world is the willingness to play.
I love that.
And I
I have
really think,
goosebumps, with like
yeah,
the playfulness of all of it. Yeah,
but
totally.
I what I mean by that is, and of course we feel this in our first language as well, but especially in a second language, that you and I'll make a acting comparison here. So if you're an actor, if you've never ever done theater or a play or anything from school, before, you know that you usually are given a script and you have to learn your lines. And until you learn your lines, you're always gonna like hold on to the script. You don't want to let it go because you don't know what you're supposed to say next, right? Because everything is very carefully planned out. Some brilliant screenwriter has, perfectly crafted it for you. So you want to do justice to the vocabulary, let's say, the things in the script that you've been taught are what you're supposed to say. But any actor who has been in a play or anything like that, again, I'm not speaking about professional acting, but if you've been in that position where you know your lines well enough that you can start to forget them. And that's really where the playing comes in. So I understand as someone who is slowly climbing up the hill of the Czech language, that I am certainly not in the spot where I'm ready to start playing comfortably in Czech. I'm still very much holding on to my script, right? Because I don't know all my lines yet. It's happening slowly, I will say, but I'm very much still on my script. But what really I think changes you is when you feel comfortable enough with the words. You don't have to know every single possible vocabulary, word, and sentence structure that you might ever need in your second language, but you start to feel comfortable enough to let go of that script. And you start feeling comfortable enough to make different choices even than you would in your first language. Because I've heard this before from folks who are bilingual, trilingual, that you kind of have slightly different personalities based on the language.
Totally. I do
So,
actually, I have a totally different
yeah.
accent in Spanish. Yeah.
But this is something that, you feel comfortable enough to start playing, right? To start making different choices. And so that's basically all an actor ever does
Exactly.
is try something new, sees how it works, and says, "Oh, I'd like to keep that. Oh, nope, that didn't work. Never mind." And you just keep that cycle going and going and going until in the acting world, you find the truth of the character. But for us as non-actors, non-characters, like we're actual real people, I think that element is still there, that we just have to keep experimenting and experimenting with our communication skills, how we approach things until we find something that is maybe authentic or true to us. And it feels good, it feels comfortable, it makes sense. But I also understand that if you are presenting to a client, let's say, you probably aren't trying to make really risky moves and choices at that point, right? You're trying to be more strategic, more clear cut, something like that. But I think it's important that when we have those lower stakes moments, that we maybe try something a little bit different. Maybe it's not a full, 1,000 people meeting where you're like, you know what, I'm going to try something different. Maybe it's not that. But maybe it's just your regular weekly meeting that you have with your team, right? And you say, well, normally I just kind of am quiet. I say my 2 sentences about my update, and then I'm quiet the rest of the meeting. That's a perfect opportunity, like a low stakes opportunity for you to try something different and see how it goes. Maybe you feel nothing and you're like, okay, I guess that was fine. Or maybe you're like, wow, actually, they responded really well to that. And it wasn't just my 2 minutes and that was it. People asked questions and they wanted to know more. Like, if you don't have that sense of play, that sense of like willingness to try something that's maybe a little bit different or outside of your comfort zone, then you're going to stay stuck in this, I don't know, communication rut where you're just going to keep doing the same things regardless of whether they work or not because they feel comfortable. And I think that aspect of play that, you have to know your lines, yes, okay, but for the most part, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably know your lines well enough. I think it's time to let go of the book. So,
Exactly, totally. I think that is exactly the case. Not that you have already like a foundation of language, but the language piece is not it. And you're
yeah.
starting to realize why I'm not making progress because you're focusing on one area only. That's the language piece that you already have enough vocabulary. Now it's not about that. It's the
Yeah.
other aspect. And it's curious because for me, I think it was my passion about, yes, acting and all of these things. Like I kind of use all of that into communication in English for myself. Like I
Yeah.
remember that helped me with my confidence because I was every time that I had to do a presentation in English or when I started as an instructor with courses for business people in English, it was all about putting myself in a character, but
Yeah.
I was creating this kind of persona. So every time I was communicating in English, for me, it was like performing. It
Yeah.
really was, I'm performing, I'm an actress kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it really, really helped. So there is this line that Meryl Streep shares that she says that because she's kind of this genius of accent imitation. And I kind of love her performing. And
Oh my God.
yeah, the way she uses her voice to like basically embody different characters, to me, it's
Mhm.
like beyond, I mean, and she says that if I can, she says, and it's really interesting, if I can feel like her, I can sound like her,
Yes.
because it starts from the emotional connection. That's why I always say you have to emotionally connect with the culture. For me, it was like, I'm going to create this persona, this Anna that lives in New York City, And it's very
Yeah.
curious because I've been attracting a lot of guests that you're from New York. Most of you, and it's like, what's going on? But I
Because
think,
you are also from New York then.
yeah, because my character that I've created for myself, like this persona, that's why I say to both Americana, or it's because it's really a play. It's about
Mhm.
playing, like creating a character that then becomes yours. It's yourself, but you're
Yeah.
playing. And it's exactly what you were saying. It is
It's
crazy, but
so good.
it's so that.
But that's something, so I love that you said that because that's one of the things where I've had this conversation with some of my clients before, and I'm like, listen, I, even though I'm a native speaker and I know there's a lot that comes with that as well, but even I perform as like Stephanie, the corporate person who has her shit together and like,
Exactly,
all these things.
totally. Yeah, we all
I'm
do.
performing
Yeah, we all
because
do.
we all do this whether we realize it or not. And, if there's somebody out there in the world who is 100% themselves 100% of the time, I'm very impressed by that, but that probably is also exhausting because part of the reason that we learn some of these cultural things, tendency things with our communication, with our voices, is to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
So, how I speak now here on this podcast is probably going to be a little bit different than, I don't know, how I speak to my mom and my family. And then probably is also different from how I would sound in a meeting with like the higher up folks at the
Yeah,
corporation. Like there's no version of Stephanie in this case that isn't me. So I'm not
exactly.
faking anything, but
Exactly.
they are still different personas. They're different characters, slightly different. Corporate Stephanie definitely is way more organized and is able to do things that maybe, fun at home Stephanie does not do very well. But that's more about human nature and learning how to survive in different areas than it has to do with like who you are as a person, right? So I think, Meryl Streep, we bow down to her, of course. But I think she has a point there because if you can still feel like yourself, the emotional connectedness of whatever Stephanie is, whatever you like, whoever's listening, whatever that is for you, if you can connect to that and still be true to yourself in that communication style, even if it's different, maybe you're playing, maybe you've made a different decision, but if you still feel that emotional connection to truth, and again, acting is just truth telling, then you are not really, you're acting, but you're not acting. You're actually being
Exactly.
yourself.
And
And
I
so it's
find
great.
it's great and it's so useful because, for example, from my perspective as a Spanish native speaker living in Spain, when I'm speaking in English, if I don't create that bridge through acting and creating a story for myself, connecting with the culture, immersing myself in
Mhm.
American culture, that what I like about American culture is the arts. So it's basically the cinema, the music, and lots of things about science that they
Yeah.
share that is amazing. So I get involved in the culture. I really feel the culture in a way from what they are creating. So it's all about creativity too. But I feel like, I'm gonna play with this. Like imagine one day in New York City, how it will be for myself, how Anna will be working and doing and whatever. And I kind of create this idea of my life, like a parallel life. And from there I can start feel like her, feel like this
Yep.
version of myself. And then it makes sense. And then I don't feel stupid. And then I can play with my voice. And then so it's the mindset shift that comes through acting that has helped me all along in my journey. And I think many Spanish native speakers don't have that, and they feel stupid and they feel like their voice, it sounds so different from themselves, like
Yeah,
not that it's different from yourself. This is yourself in a different version. It's exactly what it is.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's almost like, on Instagram or TikTok when you slap a filter on,
Yeah.
like it's still you. Like, I mean, there are some crazy filters now.
Yeah. There are
Maybe
reasons
not,
that you don't
like,
even recognize the person. Yes.
yeah, but it's
Totally.
still you, right? And I think this is one of the things that I loved about acting, just generally speaking, is that it's not about pretending to be someone else. You find out very quickly that that's not actually what acting is, but it's finding the truth in that character
I
that
love
you
that.
can relate back to you.
It's so
So
beautiful. I
it's,
think the best actors are the ones can do that. Like they have
yeah.
this incredible empathy muscle, and they are able to connect with the humanness of the character and tell the story of the character. And there is the same happens when you read, not like you get
Mm,
to see the perspectives of different people in different lives. And I find that what we do with this skill is so similar,
yeah.
because you're really getting into how an American will think about this. I actually go
Yeah.
through those things because my voice is connecting with the culture, is a point of reference for myself. So I connect it. And
Mhm.
I don't think it's a coincidence that most of my guests that I attract, you're from New York. I mean, it's beyond like what the odds. So I mean, I think that the emotional connection and the acting aspect of it really, really helps people to approach a skill like this, even more when you have to do presentations, go to job
Yeah.
interviews. So this is the coming into these other questions I want to ask you,
Yeah.
all of your wisdom on this, like with coaching different clients that you have, what do you find are things that could be very helpful for the people listening to us when they have to go for a presentation or a job interview, those type
Mhm.
of scenarios that maybe they are like really nervous, how they can manage that and be better like at communication in those
Yeah.
situations that they are really at stakes, like there are lots of things that they want from out of those things.
Yeah. I mean, it might sound slightly repetitive because I'm gonna tell you something I already told you. But I think one of the most important things, and this is something I like to do with my clients, especially like a lot of my clients, we meet online, so there's still some like limited physical activity that we can really do. But even if we can meet in person, like I make them do silly stuff. I make them make weird noises like a chicken, or I make them do like
The
some kind of
acting
like,
aspect, yeah.
yeah. And it's not just to be silly. Of course, if you're laughing, you're probably having a better time than if you're stressing about your job interview or presentation or something. But the connectedness that you would feel from these kind of like theater warm up exercises is actually not about being in your head, it's about being in your body. And when we're in our body, we immediately are more open to possibilities. And so, what I mean by that is, let's say it is a job interview. Of course, when you arrive to your job interview or set up your Zoom screen with your cute background and everything else for the job interview, you're probably not going to stand there and be like, okay, I need to move my arms and okay, I'm just shaking my body. And you're not going to do that in front of the interview person. I mean, listen, if you do, great. I stand by it, but you're going to do those things before, right? And you're going to warm up your body. You're going to warm up your vocal cords, even if you're just doing something basic like rehearsing what you want to say. But I think you don't have to be so practical. You can do something more fun. You could do tongue twisters. You can sing a song. You can recite a poem that you like. Like it doesn't even matter what language it's in, but it's more about connecting how you feel in your body, whether you're sitting, standing, whatever, and then how that affects your voice. And so I always encourage people, even if you're just doing 2 minutes on a weekly stand up call or something like that, warm up your voice before you go into those situations. So that way, once you're breathing, because that's really the most important part, you can't communicate if you're not breathing. And you can't breathe well if you're not connected to your body. And if you're not connected to your body, you're probably not going to speak very well. So it all just kind of comes back to fundamentals, but that's where the fun comes in. Because if you are approaching this interview or presentation or whatever with nerves, right? Like, and we all get nervous, of course. Every actor gets nervous before they go on. Like, nerves are a part of it. But if you can channel that energy into something more, I say a productive, I don't mean it in like the work productive sense, but taking that energy and not letting it just sit in your chest, but then like pushing it out to your arms and your fingertips and moving it down to your toes and back up to all the little hairs on your head and just moving that energy around so it's not stuck in one place is automatically going to make you more relaxed and more confident. So not holding on really tight so you can't really breathe very well. Like that's not going to be good. So giving yourself that 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, if you have the time, great. But it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be something really quick, but just to feel centered in your body. And then that's when you can start thinking about your lines again, right? So what is it that you're going to say in the presentation? Maybe it's super scripted, maybe it's not. It doesn't matter. Maybe for a job interview, you've been preparing all the stories you want to tell and the things you want to say and why you'd be a great fit to work at this company, this and that. So you think about your lines of what you want to say, and maybe there's some trickier lines that you get stuck on. So you just review those really quickly. But then there's a moment before you click enter the room or you turn the doorknob or something to go to the interview, and you have to take a deep belly, diaphragm full breath and let it go and walk out onto the stage. And that's all it is, right? And so the more we can practice that aspect in a safe environment with a coach who cares about you, where you're having fun, you don't care if you mess up, the more you rehearse, again, going back to the theater metaphors, the more you rehearse, the better your performance will be. So I'm of a mind that I have lots of job interview clients and they want help, practicing what they're going to say at the job interview, but they tend to contact me like a week before their job interview, which is fine, but we're a little bit in emergency mode at that point. So we don't have as much time to play and breathe and do all these things because we're a lot more focused because we have a limited amount of time. But my recommendation would be if you know you want to leave your job, if you're interested in looking at other jobs already, you're already flirting with the idea, that's the time to start working on job interview prep. So you have time to really learn who you are, what stories you want to tell, what's going to be the most impactful to your audience, because that's actually the one thing we haven't talked about yet is your audience, which arguably is actually the most important part of this process. But learning what you want to say that's going to be relevant to that audience is the key to clear communication. So once you have your body, your breathing, all this stuff figured out, it's not perfect. Of course, everyone is still nervous before they do something, but you have those fundamentals down. You go out, you walk onto the stage, you start your quote unquote performance, and you connect with your audience. And that's where the communication comes in. So all that stuff before is just fundamentals. And then once you're actually performing, that's where you build a connection with your audience. Maybe it's an audience of one, and it's just the interviewer or your boss or whoever.
And that's
maybe it's
many people think that is something that is for actors and performers and politicians, whatever. And no, public speaking happens just when you speak to yourself. That's just the communication style you have with yourself, and then just with someone else. That's public speaking. So
I was going to say, I love this differentiation. And I'm so happy because I've actually noticed more and more people talking about this, which just warms my heart. That public speaking does not equal TED Talk, right?
Like, not at all. This is not the podcast where public speaking equal. Yeah, I mean, TED Talks are amazing, but
of course,
it's for life. Yeah, for all of our life interactions, for improving our relationships, it's for everything.
Exactly. And so anytime that you have an opportunity to connect with your audience, to me, that's public speaking. So public speaking is even, like you said, when you're alone and maybe you're like, I don't know, filming a TikTok or something and you're just connecting with your reflection there, right? That's still public speaking. So I think, again, I said we've been talking about the internal stuff so much, we've forgotten about the other part of the communication, the person on the other side of the screen, of the table, whoever
the audience receives, because that is exactly the part where also sometimes coaching can really help you. Because, for example, with a second language, what happened, I remember to me, it was that for a long time I was, communicating myself. I was thinking I pronouncing all the words in the accurate way, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It was because I didn't have maybe a specific feedback on something. And I started realizing when I get more into pronunciation that I didn't really know the sounds of English. Like,
Mm,
yeah, my journey on this has been mind blowing because of all the like unlearning that I had to do on myself, and like understanding, no, it's about clarity, it's about finding the voice that is clear, and in, maybe if I'm pronouncing this word in this way, they are not getting it,
yeah.
and it's been huge. But I find that when you understand the aspect of the audience, that's very, very important. For example, when you are creating your voice, thinking of pronunciation, imagine something like an American, that's not really my objective, but my
Right.
objective is to be intelligible, to be clear. So then, how I kind of set my goals around my communication in all the different areas so that I get into that aspect. So I find
Mhm.
that you really need to know your audience. And talking about that, because you're an expert on tech, you've been working it was Apple, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there is so much in your journey. So I also want to ask you about specifically working with tech, because that's kind of a universe, right? They are in a
Yes.
universe, because I also have a lot of clients from tech, and it's a very specific universe. And I want to ask you about, for people in tech, when you're saying something like coming back to your body, because I find that many people, when we are talking about English communication, they are much stuck in the language piece, and they forget that more than, I mean, a huge percentage of the impact of your communication is body language. It's how
Yes.
you are being perceived from the body perspective. So the fact that, you said that and you repeat that, I think it's because maybe you have encountered that many people find it really hard to be in their bodies, to be present. So I want to ask you about your experience with tech, people,
Hmm.
like people working in technological companies and that, and their struggles specifically with this skill, and how not having good communication skills can be like, making it hard in your job, or maybe you're losing job opportunities. What is
Hmm.
your experience with your clients, more or less?
Yeah, I mean, you've already hit on so many points. I'm just sitting here smiling like, yep. But I think, I don't want to, of course, I don't want to generalize. Everyone is different. But I think just generally speaking, when you're at work, you're not thinking about your body most of the time, right? Like you're probably thinking more about your brain and your thoughts and how to write this email, and oh, someone's stressing you out because they're late on a deadline or something like that. So you're not really thinking about your body at all. And especially, and again, I'm going to generalize just a bit to make the point, if you are a super introverted programmer type, you're probably thinking about your body even less. And that's not a bad thing. It's just part of, corporate America. And I say corporate America, I really mean everywhere now. But like, they're not focused on like your comfortability of presentation and things like that, unless it makes them money, right? So if you're a programmer and you're kind of just chilling and you have your comfortable like high back chair and the keyboards that like have nice carpal tunnel or anti-carpal tunnels things on them. So like you're thinking about your body in very limited terms, and you're probably not thinking about it in terms of communication. And I can definitely tell you that a lot of my clients tell me that they never turn on their cameras at work for their online meetings and stuff. And to be honest, that's fine. I get it. In the morning for like a 9 a.m. meeting, I probably don't even really want my camera turned on because I'm probably not looking my best. But what I think that does is it gives us an opportunity to opt out. And that connectedness to body and voice and everything else, it's really easy to not be a person when you're just like a floating blob on a Teams call, right? Like with your smiley corporate picture next to it. So I think sometimes that's a bit of a crutch that people like to lean on. And I'm not saying you have to just automatically start turning on your camera, because what is equally bad is if you are like not framed properly in the camera and you just like can only see the top of someone's head or like half of their face, or it's very clear that they're looking at a second monitor and not at the meeting. So like there's a lot of things that go into camera work and
Yes.
Zoom meetings and Teams meetings. But what I would encourage folks to do is, even like if you know you're about to speak, if you know you have to give a presentation, even if your camera's off, think about how you're sitting. Even something as small as that. I'm not going to make you do animal sounds and stuff, but even something just as small as thinking, okay,
Posture.
if I want to use my voice properly and not put strain on it, right? Because nobody wants vocal nodules and things like that. I'm going to sit up straight, yes, but more importantly than perfect posture is that I need to be able to breathe. And if I'm not able to breathe properly and have enough air to support myself, then anything I say is going to sound weak or at least unsupported, right? So the difference, and I'll try and do it because this is an audio format, audio medium. If I sound like this when I'm talking, it's because I've taken a breath from my chest and not from my diaphragm, and I'm holding on, and there's a lot of tension in my voice, and everything feels very constricted, right? And also, I have a bit of a sinus cold, so that doesn't help either. But opposite, if I take a breath from my diaphragm and I have that muscle tension from my diaphragm to support my speaking, I immediately sound more relaxed, even if I have a sinus infection. And so just that small difference, and hopefully there was enough of a difference there that folks can hear it,
Yeah,
but
totally.
I think
Very,
even that is going to convey so much more confidence or clarity or anything like that. And I know you were mentioning a lot about accent as well. And I am certainly of the school of thought that like having a quote unquote perfect American accent or a perfect British accent, who needs it? It's so much work. Like, I
I think
don't even have
yeah,
like, I'm
totally.
from the US and I don't have a perfect American accent. Like, so it's one of those things. I understand why people aspire to that, because you want to have the ease of not thinking about it, right? You want to
There
be
is
so perfect.
actually in psychology, there is this thing called ease of processing that I find so interesting to really go deep in research on this and like find, yeah, when you're clear and people don't make a lot of like effort to process when you're sharing information, you seem more intelligent. So
Right.
if you have a very, very strong accent that makes, for example, an American to really struggle to understand you, yeah, you're going to be perceived as less intelligent. So actually mastering the sounds of English so that you are clear, that is very important. But it's
Yeah.
very different from mastering a specific accent when actually in America there are like, I don't know how many, but probably, I don't know if it gets to 100 accents, but I mean, there are so many different states. Each
I
state
was
has
gonna say,
an accent, right? I mean, and British English is the same thing. They have a lot of dialects and accents. So it will be more like, I think, something interesting for an actor to work in
mhm,
that way, right? With, I want to master the accent from Liverpool or from Ohio, or I don't know. But maybe for an international professional that wants to be working with people internationally, I also find that you have to set your goals specifically depending on your audience and on your
yeah,
needs. It's not the same if I'm working in an American company as a Spanish native speaker, because then I think the more you master this American sound is the better because you're immersed in their culture and in their company, you know. But if you're
mhm,
working, for example, in Spain in an international company and all your clients are from France and Prague and, you know, Portugal,
mhm.
different. So yeah, I find that's the beauty of this skill, that you have to really think of your audience and your needs regarding that specific audience.
Exactly. And I think that just it reinforces that communication is not really about you.
Not
It's
about
about your audience
that.
and how they are receiving the message. And so you're right. Trust me, I've been in situations where I've had to ask people to repeat themselves because I didn't quite catch, maybe because of how they pronounce something, maybe because I wasn't paying close enough attention, maybe because I was thinking about what to have for dinner that night instead of what they were saying, which, that's a me problem, right?
That's,
That's not a
yeah,
them
totally.
problem.
That sometimes isn't the receiver end, and sometimes we forget about that. And I think
Hmm.
many Spanish speaking professionals that I've been coaching, for them it's always their fault, and it's not. But
Yep.
maybe it's not on you in this case. Maybe it's also on the other receiving end of the communication. Communication happens. There is two, right?
Yep.
Or maybe you with yourself. but like there is always a shared responsibility for the communication to be effective and successful, and it's not only on you. And I
Yeah.
think many times, because of the insecurity that comes with doing it in a second language, we tend to put all the baggage in ourselves and like, oh, it's because I didn't pronounce this right, or it's
Yeah.
I didn't have enough words, enough language, my English is not perfect, all of these things. When actually it's, if you put less of the importance on the language and the jargon and you focus more on exactly all the things that you were sharing, it's going to be much easier for the
Yeah.
communication to be successful, right?
Absolutely. And that's one of the things, because I've definitely had people, because of my theater background, because I'm a native English speaker living in the Czech Republic, like there's a lot of times where people come to me specifically about American accents. And I have to say, I used to advertise myself this way. I've had a lot of deep thought about this topic, and I don't choose to advertise myself in this way anymore. Personal decision. But I still have people come up to me and they're like, I want to sound more like you. And while that's a nice compliment, like, thank you that you enjoy my communication style enough to want to
Mhm.
emulate it in some way, I usually have to dig a bit deeper than that. And I ask, well, why do you want to sound like me? Is there a reason? Like, okay, not that just that you love me so much, right? But like, is there a reason that you think sounding like me is valuable to you enough that you would pay money to someone to do this thing? And what I tend to find in those situations is that it is that type of insecurity, yes, but maybe more so it's uncomfortability in those situations. And like you said, I'm the same way. When there's a miscommunication or something happens and someone didn't understand my intended point, whether it's about language or accent or just how I structured my thoughts or didn't. So when there's a communication breakdown, I tend to blame myself, right? Because I am a communication coach and I didn't communicate something properly. And so I'm like, oh, of course it's my fault. So let me, rephrase, let me change how I said this or whatever. But I think that same thing happens with accent as well. So even in the United States, like you said, there's at least 50 states. So there's got to be at least double the amount, maybe
Yeah.
triple the amount of accents, because states are very big in most cases. My accent is not typical where I live in the United States. So just to give slightly more background to this. So like you said, I'm originally from New York. My whole family's from New York. Everybody's got like Brooklyn and Long Island accents and all this kind of stuff. So that's what I grew up listening to. When I hear like Bernie Sanders speaking, I think he sounds like my uncle and I just love it. So like that's something about me. So when I was growing up, I was actually living in Virginia. And in Virginia, it's technically the South.
Um,
So people don't speak like how they do in New York. And so,
I mean, it's so
yeah.
yes.
So my family, we always were kind of like standing out a little bit, and also because we're loud and crazy and these other things. And so, without fail, anytime my mom and I are having like an interaction with somebody from Virginia in this case, we get this comment of, you're not from around here, are you? And it's a form of othering, right? Because we're outside of the norm in this case. And now I'm not going to say that's the same feeling that someone who's a second language, third language speaker of English being in a corporate environment. Obviously, that's a very different pressure situation than like us talking to a neighbor or some maintenance guy or something. But at the same time, it's the same feeling of otherness, or this feeling that, oh, we didn't say something in the proper way to not be detected or not be spotted or something. We
Yeah,
blew our cover, that
yeah,
we're not,
yeah.
local or something. And, most of the time it doesn't bother me because I enjoy cultural differences. I mean, I did move to Europe and be in a completely different language and culture than my home one. But I think that when you experience those moments, you can't automatically just assume that it's your fault and that it was your mistake, because it might just be that that guy had never heard that accent before. So he's just kind of like, well, I get what you're saying, but you say it in such a weird way,
Yeah.
something like this. But that's not my fault. That's not his fault. It just is what it is. And I think the more comfortable we get with just being misunderstood and being comfortable clarifying, I think that's a really great muscle to practice.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating conversation. Like, you can have so many takes on that, because I remember when I was reading, I don't know if you know Trevor Noah, probably you do.
Oh yeah, I love him.
Trevor Noah is a talk show host from America, and he actually is not from America. He's from South Africa, and he's for me one of my favorite public speakers
Mm-hmm.
that I follow. And really inspires me. And he speaks to an American audience, not being an American himself. And if you read his book, that's called Born a Crime, it's incredibly all the things on sociolinguistics. You know, the book is about, it's a memoir on his life, but it's so much on that, because Trevor Noah master accents and imitates,
Yeah.
you know, specific ways of speaking as a chameleon to adapt to different environments and different groups of people. And I really believe a big part of his success and moving to America and all of that as a comedian had to do with that ability, because he used that a lot, like, you know, imitating people, making impressions. He has these incredible acting skills, because in the end, it's acting as well. And
Mm-hmm.
I really think that there is an element of you adapting to each audience and being able to have this chameleon effect, and like that helps you to
Mm-hmm.
integrate yourself, because if you sound like them, they feel you are like them.
Yeah.
So in a way, you're making your life easier. But then at the same time, there are aspects that maybe you can never get, because it's like, I know that I'm gonna have this Spanish essence in the melody of my voice, the way I speak, because
Mm-hmm.
it's impossible to, I'm not living in America, you know, and the purpose of my communication maybe goes in other directions. But so I find that you have to play with it and see regarding of your specific needs, because I really believe if you are actually living in America, then maybe working with a communication coach that helps you master certain sounds and
Mm-hmm.
really get in there, I find that will be useful for somebody in that specific situation to advance in your career. But maybe it's what you say, you know, you don't need to sound specifically like a New Yorker from like Brooklyn, this neighborhood.
Right.
Using this jargon and these idioms and this expression. So I find that there is so much about it that we need to like unpack and like misconstruct, is what you say, that maybe you were advertising yourself in a way, because I think it's also part of the marketing, right? Like
Yeah.
advertising of, you know, sound like a native speaker and this is what you should be striving for. And I find also that giving a lot of, you know, like understanding on all the aspects that people need are the information. If you have all the information, that you can make your choices and say,
Exactly.
okay, this maybe is what I want or this is not. And it's a lot of energy and it's a lot of time to
Yeah.
find your voice and to create a voice, right?
Absolutely. And even from like the acting side of things there, like there's a whole thing in character work about voice acting. Like there's, I mean, creating, like you were talking about Meryl Streep before, like when she turns into the Iron Lady, you know, Margaret Thatcher,
Seriously, and
she's,
I love that. The
yeah.
character of Margaret Thatcher, I mean, you know, you can be hours analyzing how well she's doing that.
And exactly. And that's actually the point, right? Is that she, first of all, she's Meryl Streep, so she can hire any coach in the business that would potentially ever want to be a coach would say yes to Meryl Streep. So she can work with the absolute best dialect coaches, accent coaches, all these things. And of course, the studio will pay for it, right? And so you have someone that's again innately talented, of course, like she's has a million Oscars for a reason. But like, even then, the amount of support that she's getting to be able to accomplish that goal. And by the way, it's not a sustained goal. She doesn't still sound like the Iron Lady when you speak to her, right? It was specifically for an amount of time during the filming process. And then maybe, I think, what was his name? Austin Butler, I think is the actor who did Elvis recently. He was saying that he got stuck in the Elvis accent because he had practiced the Elvis accent for so long that it
That's so
lingered after
fun.
filming, right? And people kind of made it a big thing. They were like, well, he's still doing his Elvis accent, but he's not Elvis. But you spend so much time trying to craft this character and living in this accent that, yeah, it's hard to maintain. Maybe in some cases, it's hard to let go. And so you have to think about it. If you are not an actor performing a role, but you're just a person living your life, do you want to spend that much time and energy and effort and potentially money to perfect this particular accent? And then for how long? How long can you sustain that? Because at some point, again, actors take off their costumes at some point and they stop acting. So, as much as it is a help to think of yourself as personas and characters and things, there is a point where you stop performing and you go back to neutral, right? You go back to yourself. And so, thinking about it in those terms, and I'm mostly talking about this kind of perfect accent thing that people aspire to, I just, you have to think about the realistic nature of sustaining that type of activity and effort. Maybe it's worthwhile, and that's something that you're like listening to me and you're like, nope, that's the goal and that's what I want to do. Amazing, fantastic. I'm so proud of you. But I think for most people, that's not a sustained activity that's going to bring value. And so then it's more about like what you were saying, that, okay, what do I truly need to communicate my message to be understood? Maybe not even the first time, but at least the second time, right? Because again, someone might be thinking about their dinner or their vacation instead of listening to you, and that's their problem. Um, this is one side note, but I kind of want to mention it. I would love to, and I don't know how this would work marketing wise at all, but I would love to do kind of like a listening course for native English speakers.
Okay, I think there
Me.
are. By the way, I think I've come across LinkedIn maybe a course that was more on emotional intelligence, but empathetic listening
Yeah,
for native speakers, so they understand when they are in an international situation of communication, what
that's
they
really,
need to adapt for the other person, because they are in a global communication setting. And it's also, for example, if they are using a lot of connected speech in a way or a specific accent or jargon, that makes it really hard. They are not being effective communicators.
yeah.
And I find that is so important for many non-native speakers to remind themselves that it's not only on their end, but also to be effective communicator, the other, if there's a native speaker, should adapt to you. And if their accent is very like tight and strong, that is on their end, that they are not being intelligible. They are the ones not being effective. I
Yeah.
think your point that you made, it's great, because I think many people forget that, and it's very important. Yeah.
Yep. You have to be able to listen effectively. And like, I love that you said empathetic listening. I think that's the perfect way to describe it, because as people who speak multiple languages, we immediately have that sense of empathy, right? Because we've all been there when we're trying to put a sentence together and we can't, right? Like you're just absolutely trying to grab any possible word from any language you know just to get your point across. So we have that level of empathy built in, right? And I think that's what you were saying before about like someone who maybe is based in Spain, but they work with folks from all different places. There's a level of understanding, even if it's unspoken, in that group of international speakers, right? We're all going to be as simplified and as direct and clear as humanly possible to get the job done.
Exactly. We want to get the job done. At the end of the day, that's it.
Because
Right.
no one wants to think about work any longer than they have to.
Yeah.
So like in that sense, I get it, I understand it. But I've been on the flip side as well as someone who was attempting to learn Spanish for many years, but basically monolingual and living in the United States and working in the United States. And I always had empathy because, again, just who I am. My grandmother's first language was Spanish, so I grew up listening to Spanish more than speaking
Totally
it.
come here and
Yeah,
like Spanish.
I was gonna say now I can come to Spain.
Of course,
But
it's invited.
but I think, hearing that as I was growing up, and I lived in a quote unquote multicultural area with lots of different languages and people from different
Yeah, and there are a lot of
backgrounds.
Latino, like Latin culture in New York, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think actually to speak of New York specifically, I think it's Queens. Um, I don't remember the number, so I don't want to misquote it, but I think it was something like there's 35 languages spoken
Wow.
in Queens. So not even New York City, just in Queens.
That is great.
There's so many people
35
from
languages.
different backgrounds. Yeah,
How big is Queens?
I mean, it's not that big. It's, for 35 languages, it's a tight fit. But it is just an amazing thing to immediately understand that not every person is going to talk like you, sound like you, and that's okay. And I think having that level of empathy and understanding is going to take you much further in your communication than perfect grammar or perfect pronunciation. That we're all just humans trying to throw a sentence together, right? And I struggle to throw sentences together in English sometimes, and it's my native language that I've been speaking for 35 years. So like, it's sometimes it's a struggle to do even that. So I think that level of empathy and understanding, and then again, going back to the acting stuff, the other side of the acting spectrum, so we're talking about the audience, but the other characters on stage as well, you basically have to practice active listening when you are acting, because if your scene partner uses a different line than is in the script, right? They start to play, they start to do something unexpected. Are you going to be solid like a rock and unchanging? No, you're going to react to them like how your character would. And that flexibility, yes, improvisation, but like that flexibility is actually what acting is. It's that in the moment truth telling. And I think that goes for any type of communication. So you have to have you have to have two people or two entities, maybe it's you and a phone, but two entities willing to engage in the communication and two entities willing to understand each other. And at that point, you can't fail, because I've been in situations, even here in the Czech Republic, when I had zero Czech language skills other than saying like dobrý den. And I was trying to navigate the city. And I was like, okay, for some reason, I assumed no one spoke English. That turns out that's not true. Like most people speak English, but I would go to like a cafe or something and I would use my body, right? I would smile, I would point to things, I would like make gestures like I'm drinking a coffee or something. I would do everything I possibly could to communicate my message that I would like a coffee, please, right? But I didn't have the words to say it. And the person, the server, whoever, was also engaged, right? They're like, yeah, of course, you coffee, right? Yes, okay, no problem.
Yeah, that's
So
great. And I find that when those interactions happen, the aspect of connection, wanting to connect, doing everything you possibly can, and like maybe so many times, just the body language, the gestures, it's a lot of communication that happens just right there. And sometimes you just have to do coffee, and like with
yeah,
all the gestures, you got it. And it's kind of exactly, the willingness for the other one to actually try to understand you and try to, okay, what is she trying to tell me? And it's the focus on the message. I think is
yeah,
also another thing that many Spanish native speakers that struggle with is they are so focusing on the words, like having the perfect words, using like they're very very stuck on the words, that it's the moment you start focusing on the message that
yeah,
everything unlocks for you, and that you find more fluency, because it's maybe with the simple words you already have, you can totally get the point across, you can totally share what you want to share. And it's because you are caught up in, oh, but have to be these perfect words,
mm-hmm.
that then you get blocked.
Mm-hmm.
And it's focusing more on the message and the audience, and the structure is what you said also, like how I want to organize my ideas. And that totally changes your communication experience.
Mm-hmm.
The moment you start to focusing on the right thing, like the message, using your body, like using everything that you have. And many times what I notice is that even with an intermediate fluency, you can communicate so much. Like you can basically navigate all situations with an intermediate level of fluency. You don't even
Yeah.
need an advanced level to communicate what you want to communicate. It's
Mm-hmm.
because we get very caught up in, oh, I need all this fancy jargon and like all these expressions, but you don't really need them. Like,
Yeah. And And just to add to that, because I'm thinking of a couple clients of mine right now as well, that, whether it's a more technical position or maybe they're lawyers, right? So there is a lot of jargon in this
um,
case that you do need, right? So I don't want to discount the fact that like sometimes, yes, legal English is like a whole other thing,
yes.
which I'm not a lawyer. So, my attempts at
And you
watching
need
Law
to
and Order
learn.
episodes,
Yeah, you need to learn the fluency of legal English. Also,
yeah.
it's kind of complete different universe of jargon. Totally, totally.
Exactly. But most of the time, even in those highly technical, situations, what you're actually doing is not speaking with a second highly technical maybe yes, but sometimes, the thing that you're actually doing is taking someone who doesn't know as much information as you, right? Maybe it's a client or whoever, your boss, whatever. And you're taking a highly technical concept and trying to explain it to someone who doesn't know all that jargon anyway.
Mm.
And that's really an effective communicator, right? Is taking something highly complex and simplifying it to a way that everyone in the room understands and gets the message. So even if you are stuck in that very like advanced, highly technical sphere, even then, you're probably not going to always be talking to someone on that same level. You're going to have someone who doesn't understand as much. Probably just me, right? You might just be telling your communication coach, hey, by the way, there's this really complicated legal thing I need to be able to tell somebody. And I'm like, well, explain it to me then. How would you explain it to me? Because I don't know anything about it. So let's practice, right? And even then, that skill set of being able to take something complex and simplify, hugely important. And I think that's where the quote unquote advanced English speaker does get stuck sometimes, because you want to use the flowery language that you know. You want to use the big important words that you've been practicing and studying so much, but like you probably don't need them all the time. So it's really hard to let go of that advancedness in this way, because you're like, damn it, I practiced that. Like I want to be able to use it. And it's like, sorry,
Yeah.
I don't need it for this communication. So it would be
I
better to
think
leave it.
it's exactly what you said before about the audience. It's like we
Yep.
forget communication is about the audience, and maybe for your audience, what is the best possible way to actually understand what you're saying and get the point across and like all of that. So if you forget about the audience and you focus so much on yourself, that's when you have all the nerves. That's when you get insecure. That's when you focus
Yeah.
so much on the words that you're using. But when you start focusing on what is the message I want to convey, and who is my audience, how I can make this easy, digestible, entertaining, engaging, whatever, that changes everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's coming back to focus on the audience, focus on the message,
Yeah.
totally.
Fundamentals, baby. That's
And
all it
then
is.
it's like actually that not that simple, but it's actually starting from there. I'm gonna come now more into the end of our
Yeah.
conversation, and I wanna go into the end with. I always like to ask about your public speaking inspirations from acting or from other places, as well as authors, people that you find interesting and relevant on communication, for people that would like to go a little deeper into researching or go a little deeper into this topic,
Yeah.
that this could be very useful for them, that you can.
Absolutely. So it's funny, we were talking about this offline before we started, but both of us have been interested in reading, and I actually just today finished reading this book called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. And basically, it's all about international communication. A lot of the stuff that we've talked about today is talked about in this book, but in a slightly different manner. It's definitely more about business communication. There's lots of charts and cool things in the book. But what I really appreciated about this, and this does tie into public speaking, is that she was able to give me, someone who's been working in this field for a while, more vocabulary to describe these different phenomena that we experience. So whether it's like giving feedback or planning and scheduling or any of these types of things that we kind of just assume everyone agrees in the workplace or outside of the workplace even, but there's a lot of cultural differences between those. It was really cool to read this and have that vocabulary now to be able to give that to my clients, to even like have some graphs and demonstrations to show them differences. So that was something that, if you're really interested in this topic, that would be a good book to recommend. I did listen to the audiobook as well, so I have to say listening to the book is also a great way to
Yeah,
practice.
sometimes it's the time to read, and like audiobooks
Yeah.
is a great other option, like, yeah, totally.
I'm a pod girl for sure.
Yeah.
So audiobooks and podcasts are my thing. But as far as my public speaking inspirations, and I actually referred to them the other day in a private message as my public speaking mom and dad. So
I relate.
um, I highly, highly recommend following on social media or wherever Samara Bay and Mike Ganino. They're both from the United States, but they both talk about communication and public speaking in a way that I think this conversation that you and I have had today, if it resonates with you at all, you also want to follow these two folks because they really talk about it in such a fantastic and loving way. The theatrical aspect of it, the like just down and dirty business communication aspects of it as well. But Samara Bay, she has a book that she published last year called Permission to Speak. Highly recommend. Also, the audiobook is fantastic. She narrated it herself. It's really, really powerful. And she also has a Substack that I highly recommend. So if you guys are interested in more of that, like I said, I referred to them as my public speaking mom and dad the other day, and they know each other, so it's even better. So those are the two that I would just personally recommend. And I know we had talked about like actors and who resonates with us and stuff like that before. Of course, Meryl Streep, we've talked about her plenty today. But I was thinking about it, and actually, I really appreciate Sofia Vergara. And I mean, first of all, she's amazingly talented. She's gorgeous, funny, like all fantastic quality. She seems like a very nice person as well. But what I really love is to that point we were speaking about before, that she owns her communication like as an actor, as a person, everything. And she fights back against some of those like stereotypes of, oh, well, my accent sounds like this, so I can only play characters like this. And I love that she fights back against that because, you know, the whole joke with her show, Modern Family, was that she was like, everyone thinks I'm stupid because I can't speak English well, but I'm actually very smart. And if you knew me in Spanish, you would know how smart I am. Like, I love that they put that in the show, and I love that that's kind of become a meme as well
I think
because it's
that
true.
yeah, I think the aspect of language in that character, it is what makes her uniquely Sofia Vergara in
Yeah,
Modern Family, and I think that was a strength. And I always say that, you know, like maybe the fact that you're a Spanish native speaker, that is your strength. It's not the opposite. And if you use
exactly.
it as that fuel of strength in your communication, that's Salma Hayek, I think, is saying,
Yes,
right? And
and
I
it's
think it's very
amazing.
important that we like go into more public speaking references that are Spanish native speakers, the ones who are Spanish native speakers, because then we can expand the way we think about ourselves as communicators in English. You know, like,
Yeah,
look at how Ursula Corbero, that I find she is doing an amazing job. You know, Rosalia, you know, that, you know, she's doing
yeah,
interviews. And you know, I find that's very important that we connect with public speakers that are Spanish natives and that are doing it, owning their communication, as you say. Yeah, that's I
exactly.
was not expecting that you were coming with Sofia Vergara.
I love her. Like, I think she's so fantastic. And just, you know, the fact again that that message resonates with me anyway, even as a native English speaker, like when I show up as myself in Czech or in Spanish or whatever language, you know, I want to be able to own it just as much and like show my hard work, right? Like learning a language is hard and getting to the level where you can fluidly and fluently communicate in it is, I mean, you pat yourself on the back, please. Like the fact that you've gotten to this level is amazing. And I hear it because I know like a lot of Europeans, especially, or any like multilingual folks will be like, well, it's expected, right? We have our home language and then we also learn a language in school and we also learn English at school and this like yes, maybe that's currently expected of you, but you still did it, right? Like there's tons of people where it's expected and they didn't do it. So the fact that you've made it this far to not be proud of yourself and proud of how you sound and how you communicate, I think you're just missing out on such amazing, I don't know, positive feeling and association like that you did it. It's not done. The work's never done. Of course not. I'm literally a communication coach and I absolutely still need to improve how I communicate with people. So the
Yeah,
work is
exactly.
never done.
Yes.
But to not be proud of how far you've come, I don't want you to make that mistake. So yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, I think sometimes we are the last ones to celebrate our wins and like the all these steps that we take forward into this journey because it's as you say, endless journey. You know, you can never
Unless,
end, you can, you know, but I think that's the fun aspect of it that you can always have elements of improvement in your communication, because I think you grow in your communication as you grow as a person, so
Yeah.
like the more assertive you are, the more, there are so many things you can work on communication. So I believe that every celebration, like, oh, I reached this goal, I went into this
Yeah.
meeting and I, could speak up for myself when I couldn't the other day. So I think it's about the little wins and celebrating that you're making progress. So it's the journey more than being fixated with the destination. I want to
Yep.
be a native speaker, and like all of that. And before, there is another thing that I always like to ask, because, I'm very, as you know, interested on communication. There is a lot of aspects on psychology that we touch on this, that is very different from, if you go into more a teaching background, or like, that is also important and it has its purpose. But I think sometimes like people don't really understand what we do, or,
Yeah.
are maybe because there is not a school of thought or a university that like communication coaches come.
Not yet.
Like it's more like what we are talking about. We come from very different backgrounds. I think most of us, we come from acting, we're interested in psychology. We kind of have this kind of melting pot of skills, and we find, oh, this is the solution for this problem. So what is kind of your takes on like the industry and how we are evolving into it
Yeah.
as a communication coach for international professionals, that it's very different from maybe other, ways, of training,
Mhm.
that many professionals, they don't even know we exist, or they don't even know the
Yeah.
services we offer. Yeah.
I think, it's funny because I mentioned that I'm working in this corporate environment as well, and I'm working in the tech field, but more specifically generative AI, so like Chat GPT, right? So
Yeah.
everyone at this point, I think everyone has heard of Chat GPT
Yeah,
at least a
totally.
little bit.
Very
Um,
useful, actually. I like it.
yeah, 100%. Like that's a whole other conversation we can have as well. But one of the things that I find really interesting is that through these conversations with clients about how to use this technology and, how to use it to their advantage and how to not have it be something that, destroys society or something like that. What's really interesting is this humanity behind the technology. So yeah, you can use the technology as a tool to craft an email, right? So you don't have to stress about the grammar, right? Make it sound more professional. Okay, great. Send. Please check it first. But this this era of technology that we're in right now is shaping how we think of communication. Because if we can get a robot to craft the perfect email, then we don't really have to think about it as much, right? We don't have to worry about sounding professional because you tell ChatGPT, make it sound more professional, and it does it in 2 seconds. What I think that's actually going to do to communication and this kind of school of thought of, it used to be, you're giving a presentation, tell the audience what you're going to tell them what you're going to tell them, and then remind them of what you just told them, right? That was kind of like the three-part breakdown of a effective speech. And I think that is going to go absolutely out the window if it hasn't already. And I think genuine communication, what I mean by that is more storytelling, authentic storytelling. So yes, of course, we'll always want superheroes and villains and that kind of stuff, but I think talking about your own personal experience, talking about lessons you've learned, being vulnerable, being in a spot where you are willing to maybe share something that you hadn't shared before. That's the type of communication. So that's like empathetic, authentic communication. I think it's going to be very difficult for the robots to excel at that. The more technical things, they'll be able to master that pretty quickly. But the genuine humanity that comes through via communication, I actually think that we're going to lean into that even harder. So maybe you took a public speaking course 10 years ago when you were at university. Great, fantastic. I'm sure that still is going to help you a lot. But now in this new era, I really do think that the humans only part of communication is going to become even more important. So my recommendation would be to follow people, public speakers, whoever, but really just anyone who's out there putting themselves out there, that you resonate with how they speak and how they tell stories. Because if you can find someone that speaks to you that way, listen to them, try to be a little bit analytical when they're speaking. What about their patterns, speaks to you? That's going to be a much more valuable education than like taking a Toastmasters class. You
Yeah.
know, I think that's something that's really going to be changing a lot. And I hope like folks like you and I, Samara, Mike, whoever else, like we're hopefully on the forefront of this change, that we're slowly getting people to realize that it's not about how quickly they can craft the email. It's about what that email is saying. And I think that's a really basic metaphor, but a nice way to think about it, that it's more important of what you're putting into it and the humanity behind it than a perfectly grammatically correct email that you send to somebody. So that's my thought on it.
Yeah, I really like that because I really think on communication coaching there is so much psychology, but that the
Yeah.
way that we approach it, I always say that I will go to psychology school and do all the years in psychology, but like for me, what I love really it's apply the psychology to, so it's more like the coaching aspect, like apply the psychology into performance and
Yeah.
into goal setting and into how to achieve your goals more than a diagnosis. But what I find
Yeah.
a lot of my clients is that once that you go through like beating perfectionism, the imposter syndrome, like understanding your blocks, the human aspect of your insecurities, you get so good at public speaking in
Hmm.
Spanish, in English, in whatever language. So it's really like the missing piece, I think, that there
Yeah.
is so much of coaching, the psychology that goes in communication, that if you miss that piece and you only focus on, okay, I'm gonna master my grammar and I'm going to, have the perfect words. Yeah, ChatGPT can do that.
Yeah.
And it's not what we are looking for. What we're looking is connection. Connection is about emotions and about sharing energy and emotions in a way that it's authentic. And though I know authentic is very kind of the buzzword,
I know.
it kind of goes into, when you think about public speaking, I think the most inspiring ones, they are really connected to their values and their kind of idea of purpose or what they want to bring into the world. And that's coming again to the audience and like focusing on the message you want to share, because when you do that you forget the nerves, the insecurities, the
Yeah.
I have to have the perfect English, it everything becomes irrelevant, because it's about, I want to connect with the world, I want to learn from the world and with the world, and then you just start having fun and play. And I think
Yeah.
that to finish with what you started, I think we sometimes forget the aspect of playing that is
Mhm.
in kind of developing a new skill. And I think that the more you play with it, the more you give yourself permission, because I think Samara Bay talks about that, no?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The more you give yourself the permission to show up for yourself and like, okay, I'm gonna play with this and I'm gonna show up in rooms that maybe feel not welcoming, but
Mhm.
I'm going to make them welcome, like Sofia Vergara, like Salma Hayek. It's like Hollywood wants this perfect American English standard, and it's typecasted me into these roles of Latina or whatever, but I'm going to make the best of it, and I'm going to also use it for helping the Latino community, or
Yeah.
it's also representation aspect on that. And I find that that's when you become an ambassador as
Mhm.
a Spanish native speaker speaking English in the world, as an actor or as a professional. So yeah, I find we're just getting started on this conversation. So
I know.
to have this conversation coming like second part, third part, in the future. It's been so fun. Stephanie, thanks
Thank you.
for coming to the podcast and sharing all of this expertise and your journey as a coach, and like all the different aspects of public speaking and acting. It's been really really fun, and
Yeah.
people are going to really find it very useful as well.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. And, I'm happy to come back and chat anytime. So, feel free.
So with this, I'm gonna share with everybody, by the way, where they can find you. So, but if you wanna tell us where people can find your services,
Yeah.
your offering, so they can reach you out or contact you, where can
Yeah.
they go to find you?
So I'm on pretty much all social media channels at this point, but I'm most active on LinkedIn. So Speak Up with Stephanie. So fully written out. And that's PHIE for my name, Stephanie. And so if you type that in, you can also go to my website, just speakupwithstephanie.com. But yeah, come find me, shoot me an email, whatever. Happy to chat. And yeah, thank you again so much for having me, Anna. This was amazing.
Thanks a lot, Stephanie. I'm gonna write in the description of everywhere I share this podcast where you can find Stephanie if you want to reach her out. And with this, I hope that you have really enjoyed this conversation, because I have really enjoyed it. I think there are so many incredible, insightful advice on public speaking for international professionals like you. So with this, I see you for the next one, and have a great rest of the day. Bye.
Bye.